Welcome to the Wealth Planning for the Modern Physician podcast, hosted by David Mandell, an attorney, author, and OJM Group partner. We share real-world financial lessons from physicians and insights from experts to impact your bottom line. Check the show notes to get a free copy of our newest book, Wealth Strategies for Today's Physician. Now, over to David.
Hello, this is David Mandell, host of the podcast. Thanks for joining us, either here on video on YouTube, or for most of you, probably still in the audio formats. Thanks for listening. We've got a really interesting guest, someone I've known for a number of years, and I think we have some good topics to cover as well. Let me tell you about Dr. Pat St. Pierre, and then we'll bring him on. So, Dr. St. Pierre is a graduate of the United States Military Academy at West Point. We'll talk about that. And the Uniformed Services University of Health Sciences in Bethesda, Maryland. After completing his orthopedic surgery residence at Madigan Army Medical Center, he completed fellowships in medical research at the Walter Reed Army Institute of Research and in orthopedic sports medicine at West Point. He retired from the Army as a colonel after 24 years of service. He is certified by the American Board of Orthopedic Surgery and an active member of the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgery, the Arthroscopy Association of North America, the American Orthopedic Society of Sports Medicine, and the American Shoulder and Elbow Surgeons. He is involved in sports medicine and shoulder research. He's been recognized with several national and international research awards. He's developed several implants and techniques for shoulder and knee surgeries, and is currently one of 6 design surgeons worldwide developing the Mako computer-assisted shoulder replacement surgery to be released in late 2024 when we're recording this. So maybe it's out. Pat can tell us. So Pat, welcome to the program.
Hi, nice to see you, David.
Yeah, nice to see you too. Thanks for joining us. So, we're going to cover a couple of topics today, including kind of pre-retirement, something you and I have talked about even a while back before I even launched the podcast years ago. He said, this is something that more docs should be thinking about, and we'll get there. But first, let's start with the same question I asked every single doc who's on the program, which is, where'd you grow up? What made you become a physician? And specifically for you, orthopedic surgery.
Well, it's a convoluted story. So my dad was in the Air Force, and he had a career in the Air Force. I traveled around. I lived in Japan and Hawaii and Alabama, and had a very kind of
Military brat.
growing up and military brat. And actually, I thought about medicine prior to even going to West Point. And my mom had heart disease and eventually died at a very young age of 53. And so she really motivated me to study medicine. And for a long time, I was going to be a cardiologist. And I sort of gave up that dream when I went to West Point, because right at the same time that I entered, they stopped the medical school program. But then in my junior year at West Point, they restarted it. And so I switched my my electives, which weren't many at West Point. It's a pretty core curriculum type place. But I switched it up so that I could get into medicals, and I chose that. But then I also just decided that I was on a lot of, it's a leadership place. West Point's all about leadership. And a lot of my mentors were saying, no, you need to go in the Army. You need to be a leader. You need to help this, this country and the Army service. So I went in the infantry initially and went to Korea, like combat patrols in a DMZ. I was airborne ranger, pathfinder. So very infantry oriented, and that's where my focus was. But I eventually just, decided that, that wasn't going to be my long-term career, and that I wanted to go into medicine. So then I applied to the military medical school.
Yeah.
And took my MCATs while studying on the DMZ in Korea.
Oh, man. Okay.
Interesting. I was one of 3 people in the room in Seoul, Korea, taking it. So, but eventually got in, and then the infantry let me switch branches, and I went to the medical service corps for medical school, and then eventually became an orthopedic surgeon. I was always very interested in cardiology, and really what did it is I set up a couple of electives in medical school. So I went to West Point to do sports medicine and orthopedics for a month, and then I went to Walter Reed to do cardiology. And had a much better experience at West Point is really what interested me. And I think, back in that time, which was late 80s, um, you know, cardiology was just evolving, all the catheterization and the, um, invasive cardiology, which would have excited me as a surgeon. That's kind of where I would have been drawn. But the director of our cath lab was, I think, 35 or 40 years old and was smoking cigarettes in his office. And,
Yeah.
it just wasn't a good environment to motivate me. So,
Yeah.
so I made the right choice because I definitely believe I'm doing what I was put on earth to do, and went and did the sports medicine thing, a lot of sports medicine in the military, and then eventually did some research and evolved more into the shoulder and elbow.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting when I ask this question, there's folks who have an interest, as you did, from family history or for whatever reason. And a key thing is the folks running the program who I know my father, when he didn't really have a predisposition to radiology, but the woman who was running that, he really connected with at the time. There weren't any, I think, women doing that. And, it really made an impact on him to follow that specialty. My brother is a cardiologist, actually, and I think sort of the same thing, that it was somebody in residency. It was the people as much as the topic, I guess, as well.
Absolutely. I think the mentors and the personalities of the people you meet going through those, you really fit into wherever your personality works. And you've interviewed all kinds of different specialists.
Yeah.
So there are, the sports world, orthopedic world is, very hands-on, kind of outgoing sports guys. And that was attractive. And I think I would have probably fit in well with cardiology. Just I found the right path.
Yeah,
That's good.
that's right. So obviously not a traditional, college med school, residency fellowship, uh, career path. How, as you then moved into medicine, and then eventually, at some point, you can tell us when that was, start to look at jobs outside of the military and kind of get on more of a private practice path. Um, how did you approach that? And was your thinking through um, uh, being in the military training, where you're saying, "Hey, I'm just trying to find the right place clinically"? Did finances come into your picture at all? Was it more about specialty or part of the country? How did you kind of make that first career decision as you were shifting from training and military to private practice?
Yeah, it was really a more of a family decision because I recently been married, and my wife Linda had grown up in Virginia all of her life, and we had ailing parents that we wanted to be on the East Coast because I was still in Fort Lewis, Washington, in Tacoma, and helping with the residency program there, and so we decided that it'd be better to go to the East Coast. So I was able to. Um, Convince the Army that was a good thing for them to ship me to Fort Belvoir, Virginia, right outside of Walter Reed, which is now part of the Walter Reed program. And that got me to the East Coast. And I started working with Bob Nerschel, who's well known for the Herschel lateral epicondylitis surgery and taking care of that. So started working with him, and he would send his fellows to me because I was seeing a lot more of instability, shoulder stuff than they would see in the civilian practice, which I still is true. Instability is a young person's problem. And so his fellows would start rotating with me, and we did that for several years. So then when I got out of the military, it was just an easy transition to go and join him. And that worked out for a while, but really wasn't where I wanted to be. And so eventually started looking elsewhere, and it's an interesting story because I had FAI in my hips, and so I was developing impingement, having more and more problems, and then I started watching all the guys on developing hip arthroscopic procedures. So I would go every academy meeting. I would go to at least one hip lecture, and I'd watch them do it. And initially, I could see all the early learning curve. And then finally they got really good at it. And a good friend of mine, Carlos Guanche, who's in Los Angeles. So I met Carlos Guanche and we decided to do my hip surgeries. And so went to the Christmas party with him for SCOE. Of course, I know a lot of people at SCOE and had a great time. We got him to bed and we did my hip scopes. But um, because I was on the West Coast, I didn't want to fly right home because of the risk of DVT. So I wanted to stay on the coast for about a week. And a good friend of mine, Dr. Ben Rubin, offered his place in Palm Desert that they had just purchased. So we came out here and stayed for a week and flew back to Virginia. And the headhunter called me and said, "Hey, I got this perfect job for you, and it's Palm Desert in Rancho Mirage, California." And it's exactly where I was. So we thought God was sending us a message, and so we took the job, and here we came.
Yeah. And um, that was, you're still at the same practice that you
Still at the
began,
same
or
practice.
still same practice? Yeah, I thought so. Okay. So, um, you've been there now, how many years to practice?
17 years.
17. So over that time, and I know I can attest this, I was speaking at a different kind of conference in Palm Springs last year, and I'm driving around and I'm seeing, was it Palm Desert, or is it PDOS? What's the actual name of your practice?
It's Eisenhower Desert Orthopedic Center.
Desert Orthopedic. So DOS. I've seen, and I saw a bunch of the offices as my wife and I were driving around. Right. So you guys have grown a bit since I've been there.
Yeah, well, it's a beautiful facility. And Eisenhower is a great story in itself because, it started really by ex-presidents. Gerald Ford, Reagan was here. And Eisenhower lived here until he passed away, did Gerald Ford. And it's just a beautiful community. A lot of retirees, a lot of people who've done very well, and where I think they say that a sixth of the nation's wealth has a home here and comes here in the wintertime. Tons of golf courses. It's just a beautiful winter. Gets a bit hot in the summer. We can get up to 115, 120 degrees in the summertime. So it's a good time to get away and do something else. But it's really worked out very well for me. I was recruited to become the sports medicine guy here. The guy who previously been here had left the group and was going somewhere else. So I came in, and one of the big attractions here is the BNP Paribas Tennis Open. So it's the fifth largest tennis tournament in the world. And so I stepped right in to take care of that. And I've taken care of the world's best tennis players for the last 16 years. So that was exciting. And then in the sports medicine world, we took care of our junior colleges and high schools, but we also just got an AHL hockey team. So we're the farm team for the Seattle Kraken. And so that started 2 years ago. We're in our third season now, but we went to the Calder Cup finals 2 years in a row. Had a great team, great following out here. So that's very exciting. But as I transition into my second or third retirement, I'm turning that over to my junior partner, who's going to be taking it. I'm going to help out for the next year or so while I'm still here.
So yeah, you've been able to be part of also an area and a practice and just sort of a general population that's growing. Just talk about finances for a second. Then I want to get into the industry and then talk about retirement. So, what have you seen if you were talking to a younger doc, if you were talking to yourself from 20 years ago, just maybe one or 2 points just on the financial piece. Finding the right advisor or avoiding, something that some of your partners got involved in, or that you wish you had gotten involved with and that you did. Any sort of top of mind lessons of just being a successful private practice doc around financial issues?
Well, I think you sort of touched on it. You need to have mentors, and you need to have people with some experience to look over your contract, make sure you do things. And things are different in different parts of the country. There are certain parts of the country that there are great incentives for ancillary products, like owning a surgical center and owning an MRI and physical therapy and doing that type of stuff. And that is very important. And then there are other areas of the country where managed care is more involved. it's harder to do that in cost of living. So I'll tell about our group. So our group was started out prior to me getting here, grew from a group of 4 guys, and now we have over 20 surgeons and 20 PAs. We really dominate the whole area. And but our finances, our overhead was skyrocketing. We're in Southern California. Um, the personnel costs are high. Their costs were going up. Our taxes were high, and our overhead at one time, was 70 to 75%. So it's hard to do well when you're having to you give up 75 cents on the dollar for everything that you're doing. So we ended up selling and becoming a clinic of the hospital, similar to Scripps and some of the other places. And that reduced, so they took over a lot of our overhead cost and really reduced it down. And then we figured a way to become more involved in co-management and other ways that you can get ancillary money from our participation in hospital. So we've been involved with our hospital, and the really great thing is we have a very good relationship, and we've had with our previous CEO who just retired a couple of years ago, and with the new administration as well. And our hospital is very and realize that communication with doctors is very important. So it's not an antagonistic thing. We really do try to work together. We have incentives that get everybody to do it. And it's really made it a very easy and pleasant place to work in. And so but every single situation is different. So for the young guy, don't be afraid to ask questions when you're going for interviews. Make sure you have a mentor in medical school or residency is going to look at your contract. And then, because as I'm sure you've discussed with many other guests, a lot of people go someplace and they stay for 2 or 3 years. So, and then they have to go somewhere else, which may not be a bad thing. I had to change. But you really want to try to figure it out. And then family's really important. If you're married and you have kids, you really need to look at that, because if your wife's not happy where you're located, you're not going to make it. And we've had that situation in our group we're in the desert, so we're a little bit isolated. It's so if family and support for your wife, because we all work long hours and do a lot of different things, you need to make sure that your family's happy.
Yeah, yeah, that's good stuff. I do want to keep it moving for time, but a couple of things I want to
Yep.
call out there. One, you noted that you had to get rid of some overhead to grow, at least financially, to be more financially profitable. So sometimes, and I've had other consultants on the program who talk about sometimes you have to get smaller to get larger, and that's kind of a common business concept, but a lot of physicians hadn't heard that before. And your story of figuring out that you needed to unload some overhead and then do some things that are more profitable without adding a lot of overhead. It's kind of an example of that. The second thing I wanted to call out was you mentioned, the importance of, especially folks coming out, like having someone look at the contract. We've had on, and full disclosure, I'm a partner in this venture with 2 orthopedic surgeons, Matt Preventure and Sanjeev Bhatia, called the Doctor's Agents. And we have an AI tool that we've developed to you can put in a medical contract, and it'll basically spit out to you at least what it's saying and where you might be able to negotiate. It's not a substitute for hiring an attorney. I would say that as an attorney, but to your point, there's too many docs taking jobs, at least their first job. Hopefully they've learned when they change jobs, without spending a couple of dollars to understand what they're getting into and what it says. That's worth doing, whether it's with this venture or you're hiring an attorney right from the get-go. But you want, and this is a multi-million-dollar decision when you're taking a new job, because you're planning on being there for a number of years. So treat it that way. And it's hard for fellows who might be listening, or residents, to think of that, because they're, don't have any dollars in their pocket. So to spend anything, it's hard. That's why we developed this AI tool that's quite inexpensive. But your point of make sure you have some review of it rather than just signing, because as Dr. Preventure says, everything's negotiable. They want you.
Right.
They'll you can't ask for triple the salary, but on the margins, you can get some things that you might not have asked for. I want to keep it moving. You, in the bio, we talked, I mentioned that you're one of the design surgeons for the Mako robot. tell us a little bit about your experience in industry, and again, broaden it to docs who might be, in the younger generation and want to do something like that. What have you, what's a lesson or an insight from there?
So, industry involvement is very important. And there are people that will take both sides. They say, well, a doctor shouldn't be talking to industry. You're going to get influence. You're using implants that, just so you make some money and that type, and kind of put a bad light on it. But industry doesn't know how to grow and to do the things that we need unless we collaborate with them. So I think, and nobody should get paid for just using somebody's implants. And that came down, 15, 20 years ago. And I totally agree with that. But we need to have physician involvement with industry so that they can make the right decisions and do things. But if you're going to be involved, you need to get paid for the time and the effort that you do. So there's also contracts in that areas
Right.
and schemes. So you and for me, my desire has always been to be on the ground floor. And I've had a couple projects that I've been involved with. The BioWick rotator cuff anchor. They put together 6 or 7 of us, and we started with animal studies. Putting these anchors in sheep in Colorado, University of Colorado, and sending them off and doing all the analysis and then developing it. And that for me is really fun. So, and then of course, what happens oftentimes is those small startup companies that you get to be really involved with get sold to bigger companies, and then you sort of lose a little bit of control. But it's still just a great experience to be involved in that. And the most recent one is the Mako robot, as you mentioned. So working with Stryker and Mako, and everybody know the Mako robot has been doing knees and hips for many years, but we've been developing the shoulder robot, and the timing is perfect. We just got approval from the FDA last week. So we are working on contracts with the hospital, and hopefully we'll be doing those by the end of December or early January. So when this podcast comes out, we'll be doing robotic shoulders. And the way I look at the robot, because in GI surgery and stuff like that, the robot does a lot of the work, and the guy's just toggle sticking it. But we do the surgery still. You still have to expose the shoulder. You go in but the robot plans, how much bone you're going to take and where you're going to put your screws and things like that. And so for me, if for all those who are golfers, we've all been there. We've been at the tee, and we're lined up, and we think we're aiming right down the fairway, and we're actually aiming into the woods, and we hit the ball in the woods. Well, the robot, by planning everything on a CT scan the week or so before, and you teach the robot exactly what you want to do, the robot's going to keep you aimed down the fairway so that you will know that this is what you had planned and what your outcome is going to be. So I'm very excited about it. My collaborators, Joaquin Sanchez-Soto is now the current ASES president, and Mark Mile, Brett Ponce in Alabama, but we also have Sam Petunia in Spain, George Athwal in Canada. I think I mentioned everybody. So that's our team that we've been working, and it takes time. It's been 3.5 to 4 years of working with engineers and going to the labs in Fort Lauderdale and doing this. But we're excited. I think it's gonna, if it's anything like the knee and the hip, it's gonna take off, because for shoulder surgeons, the glenoid, especially if there's bony deformity, is not a big piece of bone, and we want to be as accurate as we possibly can.
Awesome. Yeah, really exciting stuff. Very cool. Last topic, which I want to, give a good 5-7 minutes on, so we wrap, is retirement. Because you and I, we were at a orthopedic meeting. We were talking, at the booth maybe 7 years ago, and you were already saying, I'm just thinking about where to go, and talking about some of my colleagues, and a lot of my colleagues maybe aren't thinking about it as much as they should be, like what's the next phase. And certainly on this podcast, we had my dad on a couple of seasons, beginning of last season. We had another doc who was on the end of last season, end of season 4, for those of you watching and listening, who was in Georgia and had a lot of his career in the military and teaching, and then retired. And we've had a couple others who, have had a little bit of a challenge with that, because they go from, being the man and teaching and patients and staff listening to them, to the next day, what am I doing? Right. So that's not ideal. And you've been thinking about this. So tell us, how you're approaching this. And really like what you wrote me, which was the idea of retiring to something, not just retiring from medicine or surgery. So tell us about that.
So I think that's very important. And I think it generated back when, I looked at some of my mentors and leaders in the industry, and they had a tough time letting go. And because what we do is amazing, ego satisfying. When a patient comes in and, doc, you saved my shoulder and I could play golf, I could do all this kind of stuff. And, you're the best. It's very hard to replace that. And we've all had great experiences like that. And that's one of the reasons it's hard for people to let go.
I,
So you need to retire to something. You need to have a plan. And my plan started 15, 20 years ago. So, I mean, you know the story, but, so I started studying wine. It was another mentor from the Air Force Academy, actually, who had done all his Air Force stuff. It was big in the industry and starting companies, CEO. And he started studying wine. And there are different pathways. There's a master of somm pathway, and then there's a master of wine pathway. And I chose the master of wine, which is through the Wine and Spirits Education Trust. And I started studying and taking tests, and there's 4 levels. And just a couple of years ago, I completed the 4th level. And there's only 11,000 people who have done level 4 in the world since 1969.
yeah.
And we've got more orthopedic surgeons in the country than that. And actually, as far as I know, and I've tried to find out, I'm the only active surgeon who's been able to do that. And the study and the intensity of it is pretty complex. I had both my hips replaced. We talked about FAI before, so I had the scopes done. And so eventually got replacements, but the scopes actually bought me 13 years. So had my replacements done, and I really timed it so I could take 3 months off, study 10 to 12 hours a day for wine to be able to pass the test. So I have that, and I'm continuing to work on that. So we have a group in the area. It's an international group about Burgundy. It's called the Chevalier de Tostavan. And there are chapters throughout the world, and we set up dinners that'll be like 5-course dinners, and we pair it with a certain wine. So I'm the cellar master. So in fact, a few weeks ago, I purchased 30 something thousand dollars of wine that we won't drink for 10 or 15 years. We'll just store it, and then we'll bring it out. And for the dinners this coming season, we have one coming up. We go to a certain place, and the chef picks his dinner, and I then pair the wines, and then we'll have members of our group get up and talk about the wines and how to pair them and everything like that. And that's great. And then the next step, now I just signed a contract to become the wine director at the wine and cheese shop on El Paseo. So we have a new store that's opening up, and I'm going to be purchasing wines and pairing it with cheeses. So now I've just got my level 1 certification for cheese to really help this project. So obviously these are all things I'm going to be doing. And when you retire to something, you have to have that going on. And obviously I'm going to be involved with Mako with Stryker as well. And that'll be a big component of it for the next few years as we take off. So I don't really sense that I'm retiring. I'm not going to be seeing patients or doing operations in another year or so, but I'm still going to be plenty busy with these things. And when you retire from something, I've had partners who have done that. It's just so hard to just be on the internet or play golf every day or try to do something when we've been so involved in something that's been very important and rewarding.
Yeah, I totally agree. It is a common problem, I think, with sort of type A, very successful people to go from black to white. You can't, of course, that's not going to be successful for most people, right? Because they're used to being busy and in command and making decisions and being relied on and being thanked and this to the next day just puttering around. Um, I,
And I also think I'm going to add one more thing.
yeah,
I think it's important to change genre. It's, if you think I'll just go help out and do orthopedics again and just keep doing the same thing, that doesn't challenge your brain as much as, learning a new instrument, studying a new language, going into wine or something that's different than what you're already doing. So I think it's very important for us to challenge our brains until the day we die. So I'm going to try to learn as much as I can for the rest of my life. So I enjoy these challenges. And you can't let the old man in. You got to just keep competing with the younger people and trying to do the best you can.
Yeah, I think that, there's probably a couple reasons for that, and one being like if it's in the same field and you were at sort of the top and now you're sort of a middle person, doesn't mean you're still not helping patients, but you're gonna sort of compare, "Oh, I used to be, that guy," if you're still in the hospital, whatever, and now I'm not, And that doesn't mean not everybody could accept that, but when you're in a completely different field, hopefully it re-energizes you. Obviously, it has for you. I mean, wine is a great thing because it's social, but there's also a science to it. You can go really deep, into the soil. I mean, people study it their whole life, right? It's not
And
something that you can learn in a year. It's an ongoing lifetime challenge. So
yeah, the level 4 was 5 tests and a paper. It's like getting a master's degree. So
right,
I had to study viticulture and how to, the vine management, and then what you do in the cellar to do it. And then you have to learn the business of the industry as well. And there are so many changes, wine's changing the whole thing all the time. And
yeah, yeah,
with climate change, how that's going to affect
right,
everybody, there's, there's just so much to learn.
yeah,
And you do have to set your expectations a little bit differently though. So if you're going to pick up, like I'm going to probably start playing the piano, I'm not going to become a concert pianist. There's just no way I can learn that well, so my goal is, if I can learn some songs and play and have fun, then that's great. So I think uh, you set goals, so you want to achieve those goals. You don't want them to be ridiculous. You don't have 25 more years to accomplish them. So you have to do something that you can accomplish and seems reasonable. But I'm excited about seeing what's next.
yeah. Well, I look forward to attending one of your dinners and learning
Yeah.
from you about Burgundy or any other area of wine. We drink a bit of it ourselves. So, Pat, thank you so much for being on. Really interesting. I'm sure our audience learned a lot. Thank you for taking the time today.
Thanks a lot, Dave. I appreciate it.
And for all you watching or listening, if you enjoy this kind of content and you can give us a 5-star review, that's always great. If you can follow us on the platforms, which we're on, video, YouTube. If you're listening, obviously we're on Apple and Google and Spotify and all that. We're close to, if not by the time this airs, up to 50,000 downloads, maybe even more than that. So, there's a lot of you out there who are enjoying this, and let your colleagues know, let your partners know. And as always, we'll be on another 2 weeks with another episode. Thanks for tuning in.
The Wealth Planning for the Modern Physician podcast is brought to you by OJM Group, a multidisciplinary wealth management firm dedicated to helping physicians build and preserve their wealth while reducing taxes. Episodes from previous seasons are available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and other popular platforms. Podcast listeners can get a free copy of our newest book, Wealth Strategies for Today's Physician. Simply text WPPOD to 844-418-1212 to request your free copy. Be sure to join David every 2 weeks for the newest episode of the Wealth Planning for the Modern Physician podcast. This podcast is being provided for informational purposes only. The ideas and opinions expressed on this show by Mr. Mandell and his guests do not constitute legal, tax, or investment advice or a recommendation of any particular security or strategy, and do not represent the opinions of the underwriters of this programming. Any information prepared from third-party sources is believed to be reliable, though its accuracy is not guaranteed. Opinions expressed in this commentary reflect subjective judgments of the speakers based on conditions at the time of recording and are subject to change without notice. Listeners should seek the input of their own financial, tax, and legal professionals before acting on any of the information provided.